Coming to you live from San Antonio, Texas. This is a Drinking Buddies podcast. I'm Quentin.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome to our show.
On this podcast, you're going to hear about all things sports. Specifically, we're going to talk about basketball. We're going to talk about football. We'll talk about baseball and
The philosophy of the game. Welcome to another edition of Drinking Buddies podcast. I'm Quentin.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome to our show.
This is number 10. Number 10, folks. I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun. This is going to be a big, fat, giant, happy Spurs edition. So you guys hang on.
There we go.
All right.
So this episode, we're going to mix it up a little bit. We're going to introduce a game. So our producer at random points is going to give us a sound effect. And that means that we will pause and have a competition where we have to name the roster of
a certain team. She's going to call out from the Spurs title teams.
It's going to be one of the 5 title teams' years. So we're going to have a back and forth to see if we can name the roster, and
whoever can't come up with the name has to drink some
shot.
Tito's.
That's right.
So it's going to be fun.
This episode, we're going to talk about the beautiful game 10 years later.
Can you guys believe that? So we're on episode 10, and it's 10 years later since the beautiful game.
The beautiful game.
And if you guys know jack about the Spurs, then you know what we're talking about when we talk about the beautiful game.
That's right.
You're talking about the disappointment and heartbreak of 2013, where our hearts as a Spurs fan were ripped out of our chests.
Yeah, I literally couldn't sleep that night when we lost.
It was ripped out, right?
Yeah, it was ripped out.
But then what happened? They got themselves together. Most teams would have wilted. Most teams would have been in full rebuild mode. Not our beloved Spurs. They said, you know what? This shit ain't happening.
That's
and
right.
They came back with it strong in 2014.
We're getting into it a little bit too soon.
I'm geeked up, so you can tell I'm geeked up to talk about this, right, Quentin?
All right, so let's get right into it.
All right.
This segment is going to be called Humble Beginnings.
Humble Beginnings.
We're going to start talking about, in this episode, some of the perspectives of the Spurs, as well as the philosophy behind the Spurs and how they run their organization, how they've been their entire franchise's history. So let's get right into it. Going with...
I'll talk about it. I mean...
Yeah. You were there for the beginning.
Humble beginnings. Look, we could talk about when they started to have great success.
Right.
But let's wind the clock back to the 70s. Bounce. Wow, wow. Okay. So with me, the 70s was all about one George the Iceman Gervin, who I'm friends with, by the way. I mean, he might dispute and say, nah, man, we're acquaintances. But truthfully, I consider him my friend. I've known him for almost 14 years. He's a wonderful guy.
I call him Uncle Ice.
He calls him Uncle Ice. He does.
That's right.
He would give you, as a fan, he would literally give you the shirt off his back. Yeah. That's how good of a guy he is. But let me just say, when you talk about humble beginnings, and when you talk about even having this franchise here in San Antonio, you can't start that conversation without talking about George Gervin, because he brought an element of sizzle. He brought that fast break game. He brought that quick pace, that
finger
scoring,
roll.
the finger roll. And let me tell you, when I was on the playground, I wasn't real tall in the beginning. I mean, I brought up to 6 foot eventually, but I had to shoot my shot the way George did. So when the Virginia Squires sent George to the Spurs, he opened up an element of basketball that was truly exciting. I mean, you saw it with the Showtime Lakers in the early 80s, but George epitomized what it means to be a great scorer. He took it from all over the place. I mean, he was amazing, right? He made the Spurs relevant. Where I'm tying this all together, Quentin, I know I can go on and on, but where he made them relevant is we'd get into the playoffs. We'd get into the second round. We'd get into the point where we could almost taste going to a championship. The Lakers would pull the rug out from under us. 1 year we lost to the Washington Bullets, so we didn't get the chance to go that year. It sucked. It hurt you as a Spurs fan. But the thing is, he kept the franchise relevant. Why? So that we couldn't get poached away and sent somewhere like Utah
Or New Orleans.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like because they used to be the New Orleans Jazz, so we couldn't get taken away to Utah or somewhere else. So he kept us in the game long enough, and then unfortunately got traded to the Chicago Bulls.
But he really laid a foundation. He laid a groundwork.
He did. He was if you're building a house, he was the slab that the house of the Spurs was built on.
That's right.
And without George, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, man, thank you for all that you did for this franchise, because you helped us to get to the point where then we graduated to getting
David Robinson.
David Robinson in the 87 draft.
And what I want to talk about there is that the Spurs have always had this smaller team market, right? Smaller or medium-sized market.
Oh, it's a small market. Call it what it is. It's true.
It is. And the fact that we had to grind it out just to have a franchise kind of reflects how the city is, right?
Blue collar, hardworking, middle class, bust your ass city.
It is. And when we got David Robinson, that's when things started to get serious. And that's when I think the Spurs really started to have confidence that we could actually become NBA relevant in the way of being a champion.
First, we had to get lucky enough to have the ping pong balls fall so we could get David. And then we had to deal with the crap by stupid Rick Barry. No offense, Brent. Brent, we love you, but your dad was really off the reservation when he started saying, David would be better suited going to like the Lakers or something.
Yeah.
So don't count on him being a Spur for long. Woo, that's what I think of your comment there, Rick. David epitomized what San Antonio is all about. Humble, great guy, good religious values, and smart as they go, as anybody. I mean, just a brilliant young man. I love David, and really,
He's not a young man anymore, man.
No, he's not. But guess what? Then that was the frame of the house. So you had Ice, who was the foundation. Then you had the frame with David, and David did some great things. Rookie of the Year, took us into the playoffs. An amazing dude, man,
Right.
and just a good person besides a great athlete.
Right. And I think with David, he embodies what it means to be a Spur. So there is this concept that most people know, and it's the identity of being a Spur. And I think what being a Spur really represents is having that team first mentality, having that drive to always put the team ahead of your own interests and needs and your own stats, right? When you look at David Robinson, he was the guy for us, right? Especially in that early phase of his career.
Yes.
He was a Hall of Fame. You could tell right away he was a Hall of Fame caliber player. And I know this was before I was born, really. But
Well, you got to see him at the back end of his career. I mean,
Right.
you were young, but you got to see.
he was my favorite player as a kid. Playing with him and Sean Elliott on NBA Jam, that was my jam.
There's the NBA Jam right
That's
there,
right.
as a
They
matter
were
of fact.
an unstoppable duo. And
Yeah.
Sean and David were my favorite players before Tim came into the picture. And we'll talk about Tim in a little bit. But
Yeah.
really, when it comes to David Robinson, his contribution, like you said, just to basketball was amazing. But when you think about how he impacted the city and how he reflects the city, David Robinson is genuinely one of the nicest, kindest, most generous human beings on the planet. A lot of people say, what would Jesus do? I say, what would David do?
Yeah.
Because that dude is a beacon for what it means to be a virtuous person.
And I have a story, Quentin.
Go ahead.
It was right about the time you were born and your brother was born.
Oh, I know the story.
Yeah, so my wife and I were driving a beat up Scirocco. I used to call it the shit Rocco because it was a horrible car. We're over here. There's a Chevron gas station down the street on Lock Hill, Selma in San Antonio. And I'm gassing up, and all of a sudden this Mercedes pulls up. Now, this happened right after the Spurs got bounced by Portland. David had come, I guess, from the airport that day. It was late afternoon, maybe early evening, something like that. And I'm gassing up. Well, David's in the Mercedes next to me with his parents and his brother Chuck, and he's gassing up. And I went, oh my God. And I told Lori, I said, that's my wife, Lori, by the way. I said, I've got to go talk to him. So I'm gassing up, and then, you start psyching yourself up. I'm a winner. I'm a winner. I'm a winner. And I went up to him and I'm like, hey, David. And I go, hi, and I'm Alex. And he shakes my hand. He's a great guy. And I was like, is there any way you could sign this card for me? And he looks at me and he's like, yeah, sure. I didn't have a pen. I'm like, oh, you idiot. A marker, a pen, anything. He goes into the Chevron, buys a pen, comes out, signs it for me. That's a good guy.
That is a tremendous
That is a
human
good
being.
guy.
Really is. So that embodies what it means to be a Spur, in my opinion, because not just that team first player on the court, but also the kind of character that you have beyond the court. And David Robinson was really the first person, in my opinion, to really embody that role, that model for being not just a great basketball player on the court, but also being a great human off the court. And that is one of the core values, I believe, that the Spurs have clung to since they've had David.
David was the franchise's foundation piece for the Spurs way.
The Spurs way.
Where they do everything. Everything's done with kindness. Everything's done with, hey, yes, basketball's important, but being a good human being is important too. Now, some of those teams that David had, he had Rod Strickland, who I loved, by the way. I thought Rod was a badass, awesome point guard. You had Rod Strickland, you had Willie Anderson, you had Terry Cummings.
Yeah.
You had some awesome, badass players on that team. They didn't have enough to get them over the hump, though, man.
Yeah.
They had enough to be relevant, to be competitive, to be in the playoffs. And then
Let's be real, they wouldn't have gotten through Jordan anyway. But
no,
Jordan owned the 90s. Jordan owned the 90s.
Thank God he wasn't a rocket, or we'd hear that sound the whole podcast, guys.
Yeah. And thank God for, him missing that 94-95 season.
Yeah.
Or 93-94, 94-95.
Yeah,
because Hakeem Olajuwon wouldn't have any rings without that.
Because he was gambling.
No, it wasn't because he was getting.
Yes, he was.
It kind of was. But, yeah. So.
It was a suspension.
Yeah. They went over
he wanted to play baseball.
Oh, that sound means it's time to start our pop-in shot.
Yeah, let's do this.
All right. I said
right.
pop-in shot when I meant pop a shot.
Yeah.
I can't.
Ready?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're ready.
All right, this roster that you're going to name, we're going to start with Quinn, back and forth until one of you can't. 2005.
Okay.
Go.
Brent Barry,
Speedy Claxton,
Michael Finley.
David Robinson. Oh,
You got to take a shot.
All right. Here's mud in your eye. Smooth.
All right. So continuing on, getting to segment 2. That's a good segue into Timmy, Tony, and Manu.
Yep.
You can't talk about the Spurs without talking about Tim Duncan, and you can't talk about the Spurs way without mentioning how Tim Duncan also embodies that selfless mindset. I was really fortunate to just start to comprehend basketball and really get into it by the time we drafted him. I was five or six. And he really, I remember you being so hyped during that time. I remember when we got the lottery odds, the lottery results.
Yeah.
You were screaming, you were jumping up and down.
Of course I was,
and
because I saw him at Wake Forest. He was a game changer. He was
Yeah.
a guy that you said, oh my God, you can finally see some success. Because David was out with that injury, and you just thought, man, 2 7-footers on the same team.
Yeah.
They tried it back in Houston, and it was kind of an abject failure. Sorry there, little buddy. I mean, you had Olajuwon, who was a beast, and you had Ralph Sampson, but Ralph Sampson kind of was an underachiever.
Yeah.
He did great in college at UVA, but then once he got to Houston, I mean, he just wasn't the same cat. He had a couple of good years, and he just wasn't the same. So you just thought, man, if you could put an agile Robinson and a very good, he's not a jump out of the gym guy, but he's fundamentally built and sound. You could put those two guys together. I think there could be some magic that happens, and that's what excited me the most, was the possibilities of what could be.
Right. And obviously we know what happened, right? The Twin Towers, we had two of the greatest big men of all time in the same backcourt.
Yeah.
And it was really
Magical.
it really was. It was amazing to watch because you had two finesse bigs. Back in the day, Duncan was really
But David
spry.
was super athletic.
He was
though.
very athletic, and he had a jump shot. Back then, big men didn't take shots beyond the paint, beyond 18 feet.
Yep.
But they, sometimes he would take the three, sometimes he would step out and take a long shot. But ultimately, I'm rambling, and I think. What did you do? Why did you take a picture? What are you doing?
Okay, look, so guys, here's the other thing. You just could see that there was potential there.
Yeah.
And, all the Spurs needed was one little spark to get them going. And, I mean, you already had guys like the Ninja, like Sean Elliott. You had
Little
David.
General.
Yeah, you had Avery Johnson come in. They picked him up off the scrap heap.
Yeah.
And you had all these little things happening, these little things that just kind of made you think, maybe we've got a chance.
And you know what? That also embodies the Spurs way because the Spurs are not like the Lakers or the Knicks where they buy their players, right? The Lakers rely on getting free agents to come over. The Spurs build it from the ground up. They find these guys that everyone discards. They find people that are older, that need the veteran leadership that comes in and contributes in really positive ways.
Or like Orlando, where they lucked into Anthony Hardaway and Shaq and Dennis Scott. So that's
And
how
Chris
they
Webber.
But that's how they built their
that's
team.
how they got Penny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's how they built their team
Right.
is through the draft. And I mean, they just got lucky over and over and over until they built that team into. They should have won championships. It's a damn shame. I mean, Houston smacked Shaq down,
Yeah.
and put them away for that one. But the thing is, the Spurs were not that kind of a team. They were just good enough to be in the playoffs and not be in the draft lottery.
They were a grinded out team.
Until David got hurt, and until they got to the draft where they got David, then they got some good fortune and they were able to pick up some guys because they've always had to pinch pennies. This
Right.
team, back in the days of Angelo Drossos and Bob Bass, I used to call him Bob Dumbass, and I'm sorry, Bob. God rest your soul. Now, as a grown man, I understand why you were doing those things because you couldn't afford to. You couldn't afford to go be like the Lakers and eat all this salary. You had to build the team brick by brick. But lo and behold, we get Greg Popovich,
Yeah.
the godfather of this
The
franchise.
architect.
The architect who did look. People were pissing and yelling when he got rid of Bob Hill, who was a hot prospected coach.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'm going to do it because if my ass is on the line, I'm going to do it my way. And I'm so glad he did that.
Yeah.
There's even people today that say, oh, you know how much better we would. No, we wouldn't have been.
No.
We would not have been better if Pop was not the coach and he left Hill. They got better because of Pop and because of the things he did and because of the people he surrounded himself with.
And then Duncan fell in his lap.
Oh, my God.
And that was amazing because another thing that the Spurs way embodies is this seamless selflessness between their superstars. David Robinson handed the keys to Tim Duncan.
Yes, he did.
Even though David was still kind of in his prime.
Yep.
And allowing Duncan to take over was the right move.
Yeah.
How many would Shaq have been that
I can answer that
gracious?
question. Kobe and Shaq should have won like 6 or 7
They
in
should
a
have.
row. But both of them, Kobe, God rest your soul, both of them were selfish bastards.
They
both
were.
of them. Because what they should have done is said, let's coexist, let's share the mantle. And really, Shaq should have been gracious enough to say, you know what, Kobe, you be the headliner. I'll be right here supporting you. Couldn't do it.
No.
The egos were too big.
Right.
David and Timmy did not have that problem.
No, right away. Pop didn't have to say anything to David. David just knew what was best for the team was letting it go through Tim, and then having that complimentary role also in the paint, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that primarily those two on defense were really going to make the difference. And that grinded out. I loved that style of basketball. You would only score like 85, 86 points per
And people
game.
complain, people criticize the Spurs
As boring.
for being that much of a badass
They were
team
so technically
that they would
sound.
choke their opponents and choke them into submission.
Right, because they knew they couldn't get a whole bunch of threes off. They knew that they had to really go down low and feed it through Duncan and through Robinson. And they really had to really rely on their defense converting into offense. And that mantra has been present even to this day. To this day, it's been that way, right?
Yep.
So, go ahead.
The other thing is, think about how fast Duncan won his first title. He came in the league in 97. He won by 99. That's faster than even Michael Jordan won a ring, guys, as the headline piece of your team. So, to me, that speaks to how great Tim Duncan is because of that. Because Jordan already had Pippen, he had Horace Grant, he had these guys that they built in, which is amazing, right? He got those pieces surrounding him, and then wow, I mean, they did some amazing things. Later on, of course, they got Rodman, etc., and they built in. They had Steve Kerr, those guys. It just tells you, I mean, when you're the Spurs and you have a Spurs budget and you can do those things, and then think about the contribution Sean Elliott made on that 99 team with the Memorial Day Miracle.
Oh, my God.
Guys, I still attest to this to the day I die. If Sean doesn't make that shot, we might not win a single championship. And Timmy probably leaves in the summer of 2000 when he was getting courted by Orlando. And think about this for a second. How many superstars do you know that would cut their Hawaiian vacation with their family, come to the States, talk to Timmy, and say, dude, we're going to build something great here. Please trust. Please come back. Trust Pop. The rest is history, man.
Yeah.
5 rings. 5 out of 6, guys.
Yeah,
Amazing stuff.
It really is. And when you think about, I remember when I was just a kid watching in that room over there, Sean Elliott hit the Memorial Day Miracle.
I cried, guys. I cried. I still get choked up thinking about it, man.
Because it was so special. And just, like replicating that move on the playground, trying
Yep.
to do that. It was just,
It's
that was
impossible. Your toes right here.
Right.
And you jacking up a 3 at the very edge
Over Rasheed Wallace.
Rasheed Wallace's stretched out ass arm.
Yeah. So thinking about how that shot changed everything for the
It
Spurs.
changed the trajectory of the playoffs because it looked like it could have been the Lakers that year.
Yeah.
Show wasn't.
So it really it goes to show you that the Spurs have always had these players that they come together in this really impressive way, and they have this grinded out mentality, and that again is a reflection of the city.
Yeah.
And when you think about like Dallas or Houston or Austin, these bigger markets, these cities that have a lot more popularity than San Antonio. San Antonio's always been like the little brother.
They have corporate money.
They do, and they have a huge market, a lot of infrastructure, and San Antonio has always been kind of that, middle of the pack.
It's a blue collar city.
It is a genuinely
It is,
blue collar
man.
city,
Military City, USA,
That's
without a
right.
doubt.
And because of that, the way that the Spurs and Pop, in particular, with his military background, that coming into this molding of this foundation, where in my entire life growing up, the expectation was we were going to win 50 games every year, no doubt.
Yep.
And when you consider the contribution that Tim Duncan made, not just for the game of basketball, but on this city, he changed everything in a very important way. He grew our market. He made us such a relevant team that people had to notice.
Yep.
And so people started noticing San Antonio. They wouldn't give us our due respect.
Nope.
But we kept our nose down and we kept grinding. And that is also an embodiment of the Spurs way.
Yeah.
Having people like Tim Duncan and David Robinson, who are megastars, not be divas.
Yeah.
They had egos, of course, but they didn't let that affect their game. Because in order to be at that level, you have to have an ego. You have to think that you're the best player on the court at all
Yeah.
times. But with that, the contribution that Tim Duncan made on our family in particular,
Oh, yeah.
right? Why don't you tell us,
I got another ditty, guys.
Yeah.
I got another one. So
before we get into that, it's time for another segment Another edition of
Watch Alex get hammered.
watching my dad lose his mind. Pop a shot. Let's pop a shot.
All right, let's pop.
All right.
All right.
All right, ready?
Yes.
The roster is 99. You start this time.
Steve Kerr,
Mario Ellie,
David Robinson,
Tim Duncan,
Sean Elliott,
Jaren Jackson, Jerome Kersey.
oh, I hate you. All right.
You're gonna be buzzed, bro. Uh-oh.
Oh, mama.
I want a drink, man. Get your stuff together.
That's tasty rubbing alcohol. Seriously.
All right, so go ahead and tell us the story.
Yeah, so I've always been a collector of stuff, collecting sports figures, collecting autographs, stuff like that, collecting cards. And when you and your brother were little and Timmy was coming out, I knew I was going to get something of Tim's, whether it was rookie cards or whatever. Well, they were coming out with a sports figure, and back then the figure of choice was Starting Lineup. It was a figure by Kenner Toys, and so my wife and I are looking store by store, Toys R Us, Kmart, everywhere.
Albertsons.
Nobody had them. And they were sold out. The store employees were buying them and selling them to card collectors or sports shops or whatever. Well, we shopped at Albertsons, and it's a store that's in the Dallas Metroplex. They ran them out of here. HEB did anyway. And there used to be one right down the street from where we lived. So we go in there just for a goof or shopping. We go down the toy aisle because we always would do that for the kids. And they had Starting Lineup figures. They didn't have Timmy, but they had the series. So I went and asked the manager, and I said, "How do you get these? Are you going to get any more?" And they said, "Well, you can get them from. We get them from a place called Nation Mark. It's a distributor in Dallas." So I made a phone call, talked to a couple people, and lo and behold, somebody I went to college with was in charge of the warehouse. His name was John Black. And anyway, so we start chopping it up, John and I do. And he's like, "Are you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the one that was at Texas Tech with you." He couldn't believe it. So anyway, I told him I'm trying to find this sports figure, and I just wanted to get a couple, mind you, for my sons. And he's like, "Yeah, I got a whole bunch. How many you want?" Well, I just started working for AT&T. I didn't have very many paychecks. I mean, I was just May, and this was like in July. I literally put every piece of cash flow money that I could put together, and I bought like 300 pieces, and they were $6.50 each. They were going for $60 back then, and I was selling them for $35. Well, anyway, I made enough money that I was able to buy the house that we're doing this podcast in. And it's all thanks to Mr. Duncan being such a great, awesome player. So thank you from my house to yours, Timmy.
That's right. So let's talk about after sort of the transition from David to Tim, from Tim to Tony and Manu.
And that's what we need to talk about because, of course, in 97 to about 2000, they had some serviceable guys, right? Nothing really built strongly through the draft with anybody not named Sean Elliott, right? Willie had his day in the sun and moved on. Of course, we traded for Strickland. He's gone, et cetera, et cetera. Avery's getting a little long in the tooth. 2001 rolls around. And Tony Parker's this unknown commodity from overseas, and the Spurs had already started laying groundwork about drafting players overseas. Didn't have a whole lot of luck at that point with UA Blob and Zarko Pasby and guys like that. But, a genius man in R.C. Buford and
Can't be understated.
Yeah, R.C. Buford, and then of course we had Sam Presti on that staff. Says, "Hey, there's this little point guard, man. He's in France. He's a little badass. We need to think about him." His name's Tony Parker. He came in and had a tryout, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
And by Tony's own remarks, like, "God, I stunk." But he came back and said, "I want to try again." And he did well, and he impressed upon himself. Well, Boston's picking before us, and they're like, "Oh, crap, Boston's going to get him." Well, Boston craps the bed,
They picked Joe Forte.
Second time they get screwed by the Spurs for an awesome ball player, because the first time they should have gotten Timmy.
In
and everybody's like, oh, he's going to go to Boston. He's going to go to Boston.
Tim was preparing to go to Boston.
Yeah, and he came here, and we did it to him again, but it was by their own hand. We got Tony Parker.
Because they had made a promise to him before. They're like, if you're available, we're going to take you. And they picked Joe Forte.
Yeah, so every time Tony played Boston, he wanted to stick it to him a little extra. Right. So they get him, and they make these incredible moves, and they go and they wind up getting a guy from Argentina
that no one had ever heard about.
And we love you so much, Manu. And for him to be there, I mean, they had Luis Scola too, which I'm still pissed to this day that he didn't get to be a Spur, because he definitely embodied the Spurs way.
Well, just starting out with Tony.
Yeah.
Right. Being 19 years old, coming over to the States, playing in the best league in the world, taking over from Avery Johnson, who was a fan favorite.
He was.
And he was a genuine floor general.
Yeah. Pop ripped the ball out of Avery's hands
and gave it to Tony.
Sorry, Tony's our man going forward. And I know that pissed Avery off. It would me too if I just won you a title a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
But guess what?
They saw something in Tony.
Yeah, and you have to act on that.
Right.
You have to.
And then 1999, we draft Manu Ginobili with the 57th pick, and no one had ever heard of this guy, but he was in Europe doing some amazing things.
Yeah.
RC and Presti, they found him, and they brought him over, and the first game that he played, we were like, who the hell is this guy? He is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, we could tell right away he was going to be a stud. And the more he played, the more the city embraced him because of the Latin culture, right? The heritage.
It is.
And he really reflected that that sort of that wild spirit, that spice.
It makes San Antonio what it is.
It really does. And, Manu himself was kind of reckless.
Yeah.
And
he was like a swashbuckler. You know, those movies you see where they come sliding in on a rope on a chandelier, they come out on guard. I mean, that's kind of what he did, man. I know, whatever. I guess you haven't seen Zorro, but anyway, the other thing about it, Quentin, that I want to touch on is he also, because he is Latino, he made so many young Latino men that aspired to play basketball. He inspired them to think it wasn't an impossible dream to make the NBA.
Right.
And that's pretty awesome, man. I mean, he had an impact on the game that goes way beyond just what he did on the court. Right. He inspired a generation of basketball players, and I think that's pretty cool.
And then, we win in 2003. And that really started this idea like, oh, we have a team. We have a competitor. And we kept bringing guys like Steve Smith, Steve Kerr. We
brought him back.
Yeah, we brought him back. We Michael Finley, Steven Jackson. Captain Jack was one of my favorite players. Yeah. I absolutely love Steven Jackson. He had that dog in him.
Even though he has been slightly discourteous to the Spurs recently and said that he was better than Manu at that one point when Pop said, I want you to say you're not better than Manu.
We'll get there, but
no, I won't. Then you ain't playing.
Right. And then he told Pop off, and then that was it. I think he said "F you" to Poppy. You don't do that, man. That's great. Pop. But he kind of
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
Dennis Rodman didn't like Bob Hill. He called him Boner. I mean,
really?
He did,
oh,
dude.
Wow.
He called him Pop.
We had such a stacked Western Conference. You think the West is stacked now? Back then in the early 2000s, you had the Lakers. You had Dallas with Dirk. You had Kevin Garnett's Timberwolves.
You even had Golden State, man. They had some amazing
Antoine
teams.
Jameson, Gilbert Arenas, and Baron Davis. Another one of those players that was one of my favorites, Baron Davis.
Yeah.
You had the Rockets with Steve Francis and Coutinho
Stevie
Mobley.
Franchise. Yeah.
I love Stevie Franchise. He was one of the only Rockets I ever really liked.
You had some.
I liked Olajuwon.
Yeah, the Sacramento Kings.
The Kings with Weber and Stojakovic and Bibby and Doug Christie. That was a stacked team too.
Yeah.
So A lot of those guys never got rings because of the Spurs, because
Absolutely.
of Kobe, but also because of the Spurs.
Yeah, every other year it was either us or the Lakers just taking the candy away from the babies.
And that rivalry really fueled this passionate fan base.
Yeah.
Because going to a Spurs game back then in the late 90s, early 2000s was such an experience because there was so much energy every single night
Oh,
that
yeah.
the fans brought. And
Those were sellouts. Those were mega sellouts.
and just you really feel the connectedness with people in this city to this team.
Yeah.
And when we got Manu, that really cemented this
It did.
this identity.
It was a huge epoxy that kind of held everything together for so long.
Right. And Tony brought this flair, this
Yeah.
French flair that made us he was the flashiest player we had ever had.
Absolutely.
Right. I know we had Rodman, but Rodman was more of a head case than anything.
And we had Rod Strickland, who was he was Brooklyn, New York City basketball, big time, right?
Rucker Park sort of
It was
player.
too early for our team because when he gave that pass to Sean's like, "What do I do with this?" I mean, he just couldn't handle it, right?
Yeah.
But Tony brought a flair that he learned from Michael Jordan and all the guys that he would watch when he was in France. But getting back to the point of it, it's just this team was always like built with piecemealing, and you go pick up a
Drafting.
guy who might be at the back end of their career, and you just put it together and hope it comes together. And like the biggest piece of that, in my opinion, was when they went and they scooped up Boris Diaw. I thought that was huge, man.
We will get to the 2014
Oh yeah,
Spurs.
yeah. We're not
but
there yet.
We're
but
not
I'm
there
just
yet.
saying,
We're just
he's the
running
one
through.
I loved the most, other
Oh.
than Michael Finley. Michael Finley was a badass.
Brett Berry
man.
was probably my favorite.
And we got to take a picture with him. That was so
yeah,
cool.
that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, he's a good guy,
Yeah,
man.
Brent Berry was amazing. And
Yeah,
then,
he is.
you
Like
know,
I said, I know his dad said that bad stuff about David going to the Lakers. Still love you, Brett. Still number one to me.
that's right. So, it got kind of commonplace for us to be in the finals.
Yeah. Or at
03,
least in the Western Conference Finals. 'cause that
03,
happened so many
05, 07.
times.
We just, like that, we were winning
Yeah.
championships.
And then we got hurt a couple times by
we
the
couldn't
Lakers.
we couldn't win back to back, and that was always criticism for the Spurs.
Yeah,
But
about
when you-
why we weren't a dynasty. But I think you'll talk to people now, and they'll say, you know what? That Spurs group was a dynasty because
Oh,
they had
100%.
26 straight years
well,
of
it
making
was
the postseason.
it was truly a Tim Duncan dynasty.
Yeah.
Because since since '97, all the way until he retired in 2016, we had never missed the playoffs.
Yeah.
We had never had, I think, less than 50 wins in a season.
Yep.
We had the highest win percentage in any over any basketball club in the league.
Yeah.
We
The big three of any team, the
Winningest
gold
big three.
standard now is the winningest big three in the regular season and the postseason.
it'll never be matched.
It will never be matched.
That core. I mean, Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili became Hall of Famers because of Tim Duncan.
Absolutely.
Because Tim was so selfless that Tim could have averaged 30 points a night for most of his career.
Yeah.
It would have been a shorter career. He probably wouldn't have won as many rings. But Pop had this perspective in mind. And this is really where we get into the genius of Pop. So, do you want to go to the next segment?
I do, but I do want to say that we talked about Ice being the slab, right? We talked about David being the framework. Timmy is the finished product of the house. That's why it's a palace, because Timmy, it's the palace, it's the house that Tim made.
It really
Thank you
is.
so much, Timmy. You, not only did you touch our family in the way that you did by us being able to own our own home because of your talent and because people love you and wanted something to remember you by, but you also set the benchmark and you set the bar for what we need next.
Yeah.
So all this stuff that's happening now, it did come from suffering because you're not here anymore, but it also taught this franchise, what can we do if we ever get the next big thing? And let me tell you, it's here, folks, and that's coming later on.
That's right. So now I want to get into the early 2010s.
Okay, let's do that.
So we draft Kawhi Leonard,
Yes.
2011.
Yes.
you and I both were so excited when we drafted him.
Yeah, because
we're
we
like,
stole him from Indiana.
yeah, we were
George
like,
Hill was good,
if we
but
could
he wasn't no
somehow trade
Kawhi
to get
Leonard.
Kawhi Leonard, we were both. And I know this is like, oh no, you're just blowing smoke just because you can say that, retroactively.
No, did you watch
No.
the NCAAs when Kawhi Leonard played this vicious defense?
Yeah.
And he had a shaky shot, but you could see there was talent.
There was a lot of talent, and we were excited because we knew that we were missing that 3-and-D wing
Yeah.
with Bruce Bowen that we had, with Sean Elliott that we had,
Yeah.
and we needed a lockdown defender.
And we had Danny Green, but he was a little too inconsistent. And
Right.
Danny, congratulations on your retirement.
Congratulations, Danny. You were
A great
huge.
piece of it.
You were huge to our success.
Yeah.
But Kawhi Leonard, starting out, we really fixed him up
Yeah.
into the megastar that he
Oh,
became.
the shot doctor, those
Chip
guys,
England.
Chip England,
Yeah.
Chad Forcier, those guys, they worked with him all the time and got him to the point where he was.
Right. And so when you look at that 2013 season, we looked unstoppable.
Yeah.
We looked fantastic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was when the Heatles were at their peak.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to take them on because I knew that our team was better, and we were.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And when we got to the finals that year, I was so excited because I was like, we're going to show up LeBron. That devastating shot.
Yeah.
That
And really,
devastating shot.
you know, I know Pop won't say this, but truthfully, you have Timmy out there for that last little bit because he's your leader.
We're talking about the 23 Ray
We're talking
Allen.
about- yeah, 2013
jump shot that
the
broke my heart.
Yeah, the Ray Allen jumper. But the thing is, if you had Timmy there to rebound it, the game's over.
Yeah.
The game is essentially over. They go and they kick it out, or no, Wade shot it, and then the
No,
rebound.
it was LeBron James shot it.
That's right, and
Yeah.
then it was boarded by some.
Bosh.
Yes, and he kicked it out to Ray Allen, who nails the jumper.
That's right.
And that broke our heart. And Timmy, of course, he missed a bunny and all that, but I honestly still believe in my heart that if Timmy was down there, he gets the board and it's over. But here's the thing, folks. And let's say they do win 2013. There's no guarantee
No.
that they come back with the fire for redemption
No.
of 2014.
When we lost in 2013, that's when the beautiful game started.
It's
because
without a doubt.
Popovich has always preached stoic values. Control what you can control, let go of what you can't.
Yeah.
And with Pop, he forced them to watch that shot, that game, the first day of training camp that
Yeah.
next season. And that set the tone like we're on a mission. Because at that point, you had an aging Tim, you had an aging Tony, an aging Manu, a really green Kawhi Leonard. You had a bunch of these pieces like Patty Mills, Boris Diaw, Tiago Splitter, Danny Green, that
Corey Joseph.
Corey Joseph, that were all these guys that
And
we
we
had.
loved him at UT.
Yeah, we were
did.
excited when we thought we were gonna have to trade him when we got Kawhi.
Yeah.
Because we traded to get the 15th pick. We were like, oh, we gave up our first. No, we got to keep our first round pick in Corey Joseph.
Yeah.
Now, if we had taken Jimmy Butler that pick, that would have changed everything. But that's that's different. So
Yeah, but
No,
Corey
going
did
back
his
to-
thing in 2014.
yeah, but
though.
going back to that, the start of that season, I watched every single game in 2014, and I have never seen basketball played that well.
Yeah. It was on a high level. Absolutely.
We were playing as a team. That was where the pinnacle of Spurs basketball took over.
Oh, I
right?
agree.
Marco Bellinelli, right? Like these guys,
Yeah.
guys that were like
Bellinelli was bellissimo, man. That
Oh,
guy
man.
was amazing.
He was fantastic for us. And you think, looking back 10 years ago, we were playing a style of basketball that you hadn't seen since the 80s.
Yeah.
And we were crushing everybody.
Yeah.
And you couldn't stop them. You could not stop the Spurs. And that team in particular worked so well together. They were such a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
That people started to recognize. That's when people started to talk about the Spurs like, oh, hey, we've been passing on this dynasty for, at that point, it was about 16 years, 17 years that they hadn't given us any credit when we had already won 4 championships.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that team was the most underrated team of all time.
It was, but at the moment, it was respected and it was appreciated because they even dubbed the pundits dubbed this as the beautiful game. And here's my thing: if you want to talk about how genius Pop is, he went from defensive prowess in the '99 season to beautiful game in the 2014. Think about the metamorphosis that has to happen with a good base of those players. You lose David Robinson, you lose Sean Elliott, you keep on trucking. You get guys like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, and you keep on trucking. And you go and you get these other pieces that build that you're able to kind of compress together to make this team keep on trucking. Then you go and you get lucky as all get out that Indiana was dumb enough to trade. George Hill had a few good years with Indiana,
Right.
but he ain't no Kawhi Leonard. And I
No.
know Kawhi Leonard's kind of old and busted now, right?
Right.
But you gave up that. You didn't just get Kawhi Leonard. You also got to get Corey Joseph with your pick. You also got to pick up
Bertans.
Davis Bertans.
Who was a huge contributor.
And there was another player that stayed overseas and he didn't work out. I think it was Roberto Yavatkis is who they wound up getting.
no,
And
it was
I don't remember.
he was an Italian player.
Yeah, but anyway.
Was it Adam Hanga?
I'm not sure, but he didn't work out. But the thing is you were able to just basically scalp them.
Yeah.
And that's why teams for a while were afraid of making deals with the Spurs because they had the Euro players scouted like a mother. Why do you guys think there's such an influx of European talent? That shit wouldn't have happened without the Spurs setting the groundwork. They were the grandfathers of drafting Euro players and developing them and making them great.
The last 3 players to win MVP have all been European players.
Yep.
Right? Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic. The Spurs set the standard because they had to draft, because they had to find these guys, these diamonds in the rough from all over the world.
Yeah.
They came together and they found them. And they don't just find superstars, right? Like they found Tony, superstar. They found Manu, superstar, right? But they find these guys, like you said, off the scrap heap, that wind up turning into studs. Not superstars, but really good contributors. And
Yeah.
they wind up going on to have really good careers.
We drafted Leandro Barbosa.
Yeah.
You know, we drafted
Goran Dragic.
Goran Dragic. I mean, I wanted to keep those guys, but, you know, they had their intent where they wanted to send them.
Right. But like Luis Scola, like you
They
said.
also drafted, they also had Giracek, who wound up moving on also. They had him and they traded him. But they've done this over and over and over. And what I think is great is, besides doing all this work, this franchise constantly learns. They don't make the same mistakes over and over like some of these other teams do, giving away all their pieces, giving up their draft capital. Like the Lakers, yes, they've won more titles than us.
Well, they've also been around for like 40 more years in
Well,
the Spurs.
not just that, but they also carried some titles over from Minneapolis when they were the Minneapolis Lakers. So, but when you have that media market money and all that, but they're still making the same dumbass mistakes that they've always made, which is trading draft pieces, which is trading great players.
Well, that had worked for them in
and
the past.
Overspending for these guys that are a little too long in the tooth. And what do you have to show for it? I mean, look, they got lucky as hell when they got Dalton Connect in the draft this year.
Yeah, they really did.
That was just an abject failure by the 15 teams before them.
Right.
So it just, you know, the Spurs are learning and they're putting together a really good base for the future. So, but 2014, getting back to that,
Yeah.
that was the most incredible team with redemption in mind. It wasn't about vengeance.
No.
A lot of people are like, oh, they wanted revenge. No, it was about redemption to show you that this is what we were and should have been.
And to that point, we had people like Patty Mills and Danny Green step up, and Boris Diaw, like you said.
That was the most genius piece that they picked up because he and Tony had that synergy, and you could
He
just
and
see it on the
Manu,
court.
he and Patty had that synergy
Yeah,
too. And
yeah.
you look at that and you think, my God, just that second unit.
Selflessness, dude.
Selfless. Most of those guys could have been starters on that
Oh, yeah.
second unit. Marco
Yeah.
was playing great. Boris was playing great. Patty was playing great. Manu was playing great.
Manu took a
Thiago.
6-man role when he could have started for anyone.
That's the other thing. That goes back to the Spurs way, the selflessness, man. Manu sacrificed a huge portion of his career to come off the bench. How many megastar? He was a megastar.
Yeah.
Like, he was so underrated. People, because he wouldn't put up the stats, because he was sacrificing those stats because he knew it was for the good of the team.
Yeah.
It was because it was for us to win.
Yeah.
And you look at that 2014 Spurs team, no one averaged more than 17 points. Tony Parker was our leading scorer.
yeah.
And you win a championship. You win over 60 games and you win the championship. That is a team that is truly locked in and truly playing for each other, right? So you have, I don't know why I did this just now, but you have like this ball movement that still, I mean, hasn't been replicated. And you started to see after that 2014 season, you started
Golden
to see
State.
Golden State taking on a lot of that, except they incorporated Steph Curry with his 3-point shooting.
And they had Kevin Durant.
They
Let's be fair.
well, yeah.
You don't have to be that damn good,
Right, if you have
when you
KD
go and
and-
throw him into the mix.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
You know, he ring chased for a couple of years. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
That's true.
But
So that season was about redemption. It really
was.
was. I know we've been all over the place, but
guess what? It's the season's coming up next week. I can't wait. They play Dallas and they play Houston, and I'm excited for this year. And before we get to the next segment, I just feel like the Spurs are constantly evolving. They're constantly learning.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're constantly improving the Spurs way.
You look at the history of the Spurs and you look at how, like you said, when in the 90s, they were all defense. And then they get to Tony and Manu, letting them run the offense in this sort of fast-paced way. And then you transition to Kawhi Leonard, letting him run the show. And then you transition to like LaMarcus and DeMar DeRozan, and then you have guys like Wemby. And they've, throughout all of it, they're letting Wemby do his thing because he is unique, right? And like you said, we will talk about that more. But let's get into the next segment. Pop the Rock.
Pop the rock.
So, this I want to focus on just Greg Popovich because
Absolutely.
he more than the players, Pop has really represented what it means to be a Spur.
The constant through everything from the David Robinson era to now is Greg Popovich.
It
Let's
is.
be real about it.
It is. And Pop means so much to the city because he really is like, in a lot of ways, he is a lot like Socrates, espousing all of this wisdom, all of this knowledge, and always keeping perspective that this is just a game. As passionate as we get, like basketball to me is one of the greatest things. Like it just it brings me joy.
Yeah.
Pop preaches to his players that it is just a game
Yeah.
and that they are so lucky to be playing this game at a professional level. Is that time?
It's time.
Okay, it's
Oh,
time.
it's
It's
time.
time for that segment,
Oh,
that game,
God.
folks. All right.
I'm just going to put it out there. I'm probably going to lose this one too.
All right.
All right.
I want to drink, man, so
I know. I'm trying.
Don't
Well,
fuck
you
it
can
up.
throw the game. Let's go.
All right. Your year is 03.
03.
Go.
Tim Duncan,
David Robinson.
Manu Ginobili.
Sean Elliott.
No.
Nope.
No.
Sean Elliott was in 03?
No, he wasn't. He retired 02.
Oh, son of a gun.
I'll do one just because.
Thank Jesus.
Okay.
Son of a biscuit.
So Yeah, good Lord, that is pretty strong.
I'm so glad I'm home, folks.
Not driving anywhere. All right. So getting back to Pop. Popovich is always preaching these philosophies to his players, right? Like he shows them videos of like Carl Lewis. He shows them videos of Hugo Chavez. Like he shows them all of these things to get them to start thinking about life beyond basketball.
Yeah.
And Popovich really is the type of person that practices what he preaches. Like he stresses like this family value, right? And that really is also a tie into the city, right? It's very family oriented, very connected to one another. And the beauty of the Spurs and Popovich in the Spurs way is that they always seem to put the team first and the success of the franchise before anything else. And they still maintain a level of loyalty. They still, like, even in trading players, right? They make sure that they trade players to destinations where they want to go. Like Corey Joseph, they sent him to Toronto. He's from Canada.
Yeah.
Thiago Splitter, they sent him to Atlanta, where he was going to work with Coach Bud.
Even Kawhi.
They sent him in the best.
Honestly, I would have sent him to the crappiest team,
Right.
just because of how he was.
Right.
Where did they send him? They sent him to Toronto so he could compete for a title, and they won one.
Right.
And he hasn't done jack squat since,
That's
by
right.
the way. But the Spurs don't hold grudges. Like they sent Derek White to Boston.
Right.
Derek White does not have animosity towards the Spurs because he knows they were trying to rebuild and he didn't want him in a crappy situation, so they sent him to Boston.
Yeah.
You know, even DeJounte Murray, they sent him to Atlanta and he badmouthed us here and there, but he still has respect for Pop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no,
That goes to show
Pop
you.
isn't petty. He isn't.
No.
Despite what happened between him and Rodman and what happened between him and Steven Jackson, Pop keeps it cool and he's like, I want to step in their shoes. Pop is the empathy. He's the epitome of empathy to me.
But he's
Because-
also the epitome of that old school mentality that, like, he pushes you to be better than you think you are.
Yeah.
He gets the best out of his players, and he's always done that.
Yeah.
Like, to scream in Tim Duncan's face and have Timmy, this also shows the character of the players that they've had, like David and Tim and Tony and Manu.
Yeah.
Because how many superstars can get screamed at in front of the entire team and take it?
Yeah.
That set the tone for everything because people started to think, if Tim Duncan's getting chewed out, I better get my stuff together because there's no excuse.
Now, let me just say, thank God Latrell Sprewell wasn't on our team.
Oh my God! No, you would have tried to choke out. Pop. Yeah, you would have tried to choke him out because, and that's the thing, right?
But he wasn't the type of player to accept that type of coaching.
Right.
And that's where you have to know your staff. That's where you have to know the players you draft. Do they have that quality
Of character.
of character to be able to accept it?
Right.
And
So-
Timmy did.
So Pop has always represented to me stoicism, right?
Absolutely.
Stoicism is the philosophy of controlling what you can control, letting go of what you can't, rationally controlling your emotions. And with Pop, he's always preached, right? Don't get too high, don't get too low.
Yeah.
Always maintain that steady ship, and that balance is what has gotten us 5 championships.
Yeah.
And so with Pop, I mean, this is a good segue into our next segment, Wemby.
Wemby.
So-
Not El Wemby, just Wemby. Y'all know where I'm going with that.
Maybe. Right, yeah.
Maybe. I plead the fifth.